everybody, it is Rachel here with Yarn and Play Crochet. So today I'm going to do a tutorial on this beanie that I made here. I'm calling this the Puffs and Beads beanie because it has these rows of puff stitches with the bead stitch in the middle and then puff stitches again. And it has this really fun kind of mock knit stitch that goes around. And it's kind of hard to tell, but it's on the bottom here too, just because of the yarn that I use. It's a little bit tricky to see. Excuse me, but this is a really simple stitch that just uses half double crochets, and so it's nothing too complicated, but we'll go through slow just so you guys know exactly what you're doing here. If this is an adult size beanie, if you wanted to make this smaller for a child size, or if you just have a smaller head than I do, which most people do because I have a fairly large size head, but I do think that how I have the stitches worked out should fit the majority of people, because this is just a smidge snug on me. So I think that this will fit the vast variety of people, but if you needed to make it smaller, as we do our increase rows here, you would just do one less increase row and then you would start going down. And if you wanted to make it shorter for a child size, you would just work a couple fewer rows up here or down here, depending on the size that you were hoping to make it. So I hope that that's pretty easy to understand how you can adapt this pattern to fit a wide range of sizes. Now I am going to start using a magic ring. I will link up in the cards up here the tutorial on how to do a magic ring. If that is still intimidating to you and you'd rather not use a magic ring, you can always chain 4 and make it into a circle and work into the center of your circle. So I'll show you first how to do the chain 4, and then I will continue on using the magic ring. Gotta find the end of my yarn here. There it is. Lost it for a second. Okay, so if you are doing the chain 4 method, you're just gonna make a slip stitch and put it on your hook. I'm not gonna spend too much time here because I do want to get into the actual tutorial. But if you're doing the chain 4 method, you would do it just like you would start a granny square. You would chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you would do a slip stitch back into that very first chain that you did next to your knot. Oh, get my tail out of the way here. In order to make a little circle. And then you would work up from there. So you'd chain 3 from that point, and then you would work the rest of your stitches into this circle space here that is the center of your chain 4 loop that you made. That is always an option. If that seems a little simpler for you, you can definitely do that, but I prefer to use the magic ring, and so I'm going to start the beanie using the magic ring. So to do the magic ring, you lay this over your hand here. You pinch the string, the yarn, between your ring finger and your thumb. You separate your fingers a little bit. You work the yarn over like this, so you have an X. Then you take your working yarn and you pinch it between your ring finger and your pinky, so your hand should look like this. Just like that with your little tail down in front here. So the working yarn should be over here and your tail should be over here. And then you're going to poke your hook through, up through there, hook it, and pull it through, and then slide that off your fingers, grab your working yarn, and chain 1 just to lock in your magic ring. And now after you do that, you're going to chain 2 more, so you have a total of a chain 3. 1, 2, and then we're going to work 9 double crochet into our big circle right here, our magic ring circle. So that's a little bit easier for me to do when my circle is a bit smaller, so I'm going to snug it down just a bit. And then I'm going to do 9 double crochet into this circle here. So yarn over, hook it, pull it up, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, hook your yarn over, go through, hook your yarn on the back side and pull it up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and then you're going to do that 7 more times. Now, if you're not familiar with working into a magic ring, it feels a little bit different than working into a chain 4 space like you would standard for crocheting a granny square. But once you get the hang of it, it's not too complicated. It just requires like adjusting how you kind of hold the yarn down. You see how I kind of hold the ring down and pinch it here and the tail out of the way with these 2 fingers while I'm working. That kind of makes it a little bit simpler for me, but everybody does it a little bit different. But once you get it figured out, it's really a nice way to start your beanies. So let me see how many I have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Perfect. And then this chain 3 that we did here is going to count as our first double crochet. So now that I have a total of 10 stitches in there, including the chain 3, 9 double crochet without the chain 3. I'm just going to take my tail here. I'm going to pull on this and snug it right down. That's going to make a nice tight little top to our beanie. Now, from here, we need to connect because we're working in the round. And so you want to look for, this is going to be our first stitch right here. You see our double crochet right here. This is the top of that double crochet. Now I want to go back 1 from the top of that double crochet to right here because I'm going to be doing a slip stitch into my last chain before the double crochet. So I'm going to put my hook back in here. You don't have to take it off the hook. I was just doing that to kind of point. So go ahead and find that chain, that last chain right there before the top of your double crochet stitch. Put your hook in so you have 2 loops right there on your hook. Yarn over and slip stitch into that top chain. Now I usually kind of snug down my slip stitch because I like my slip stitch joints to be nice and tight so that when I come back around, I'm not trying to find a slip stitch joint to work into because I don't want to work into that. So that is that right there. Now we're going to work 2 double crochet into each stitch all the way around, and our chain 3 is going to count as our first double crochet. So chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And this chain that you just slip stitched into, that counts as our first stitch from the previous row. So we're going to do 1 more double crochet into that space that you just slip stitched into. So it should look like that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to double crochet all the way around. Now it might be a little tricky to see where our next stitch is because if you look here, because we have that slip stitch join right there, it's kind of pulling the top of our stitch up a little bit, and so it looks a little funny. Where you're going to put your hook is underneath right there, and that one that's getting pulled up a little bit. So you have your 2 loops on your hook, and that is the top of your next double crochet. So that is where we are going to be doing our next 2 stitches into. So put my loop back on my hook here, yarn over, get both of those onto your hook here. Do your first double crochet, and then do a second double crochet right into that same space. Now the rest of the way around should be a little simpler. So just go ahead and do 2 double crochet into each stitch all the way around your circle. And then I will meet you back when we join for our next row. Now we are back around, and I have to do 2 more stitches here in this last double crochet stitch right here, but I kind of wanted to show you what it looked like before you got to that last stitch so you can kind of see for reference. So do your last 2 double crochet in that last stitch there. And now we're doing the same thing like we did to join on this row here. You're looking for that top chain stitch from your chain 3. Now if you want to look for this double crochet stitch here and look 1 back, you can do that way. Otherwise you can count up from here. 1, 2, 3. Both will find you that last chain. Now you want to do just like we did last time and slip stitch into that chain stitch, getting 2 loops on our hook to get through that chain stitch there. Do a slip stitch, and then I kind of snug it up a little bit. All right, and now we're going to start working half double crochets from here. So we just did 2 double crochet rows just to kind of get ourselves established here, but now we're going to start working these stitches that kind of have that mock knit look to them. But we're just going to start by doing a full row of half double crochet around for our 3rd row. So to do that, you just need to chain 2, 1, 2, and then we are still increasing our row. So this counts as our first half double crochet. Those 2 chains count as our first half double crochet. So what you're going to do is you're going to do 2 stitches, not into the chain that we just did, because now we just want to have a sequence of stitch 1, stitch 2 into each stitch all the way around. So this is a stitch 1. So I'm going to yarn over to start my half double crochet, and I'm going to find my first stitch, which remember looks a little bit different because it's this one and then that one that's pulled up a little bit right there, if you can see that. So put your yarn over and then get your hook through those 2 right there. Yarn over, pull it up, and then to do a half double crochet, we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on our hook at one time. Now we're going to do a second half double crochet into that same stitch that we just did. Yarn over and pull through all 3 loops at once. And then we're going to do 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 1 stitch, 2 stitches all the way around because we're still increasing for this row. So do a single half double crochet into our next stitch, and then 2 half double crochets into the next stitch after that. And then 1 half double crochet into the next stitch, and 2 half double crochet into the stitch after that. And then 1 half double crochet, and then 2, and then keep doing that sequence of 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 1 stitch, 2 stitches until you're all the way back around, and then I will meet you back over here. All right, so we're nearing the end of our 3rd round. Oops, sorry, my camera's bumping a little bit. There we go. We're nearing the end of our 3rd round, so I have 2 stitches left, so I'm going to be on a single double crochet for that first one, and then 2 double crochet into, or 2 half double crochet, pardon me, half double crochets into that last stitch there. And then find your second chain, not your 3rd, so 1, 2, and you are going to slip stitch into there to join. 2 loops on there, and slip stitch to join, just like that. So that's 3 around. Now we're going to do something just a little bit different on this next round because this is how we start forming that kind of mock knit stitch. So I'm going to flip my work over here a minute. And you can see with the half double crochet, the back of the stitch looks different than the back of a double crochet stitch. So we have our 2 loops here, which is what you usually work into, but on the back side, you also have this 3rd loop that's kind of hanging out right here. And that 3rd loop that's sort of on the back side of your stitch is the loop that we're going to be working into all the way around, and that is going to push your 2 stitches here forward so that they lay flat, and that's what gives it that kind of mock knit stitch. So I'm going to show you how to do this, and I will try and go slow. Just stick with it. Once you get it down, you'll remember. But to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain 2. And now this stitch, remember, this is our first stitch right here, and this is the one that looks a little funny. So if we can get past this stitch, I think you guys will be doing great. So kind of tip your work over, and you can see how there is this one that's kind of getting stretched out right here. We want to go tuck right in behind there, skip the one that's stretched out. And my stitches are a little tight. and poke into there on the back side of our stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and yarn over. I'm going to find that little stitch that I'm looking for on the back here, and I'm going to poke through, pull up a loop, and then yarn over all 3 on my hook. And now we're still increasing on this row as well. So we have what counts as 2 single half double crochets here. So this counts as our first one in its own stitch, and this counts as the second one in its own stitch. So for our third one here, we want to do 2 half double crochet into the back of this next stitch to count as our increase, because our pattern is going from 2 in every stitch with the double crochet, and then 1 and then 2 and then 1 and then 2 and then 1 and then 2, and now we're doing 2 and then 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 2. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're accustomed to increasing and working in the round, that should sound very familiar, but I will go ahead and show you how to do that. So yarn over, kind of tip your work, because you're looking for that back loop right there. Or I shouldn't even call it the back loop, it's the behind loop, because technically the back loop would be considered this one here. So it's the behind loop, I'll call it the behind loop. And then you're gonna do a half double crochet, yarn over, and into that same back loop, or behind loop, you're gonna do another half double crochet. So there's your increase. And then we're gonna do 1 half double crochet into the next 2 stitches in that behind loop. So flip your work a little bit, look for that behind loop, and half double crochet into there. Pull up some more yarn here. There we go. And then do that one more time into the next stitch. So tip it, look for that behind loop, and do your half double crochet into there. And then you're going to do 2 half double crochet into the next behind loop. So yarn over, tip your work, look for that behind loop, 1 and 2, and then do a 1 half double crochet into the behind loop on the next 2 stitches, tip, find that behind loop, 1, and then 1 into the next stitch, 2, and then 2 into the behind loop on the next stitch. And you can see as we're working around how working into that behind loop pushes the 2 stitches that you would normally be working on, your top stitches, forward, creating kind of that fake knitted stitch look. And we're going to do that all the way down the beanie. So get familiar with how to do this. Like I said, once you get used to it and you know exactly where that behind loop is, you'll see it every time, and it shouldn't be an issue to work into. So that was an increase right there. So we're going to do 2 more, tip, work into that behind loop, 1 into the next stitch of the behind loop, and then do a 2 into the same behind loop to make an increase, and then just 1 stitch into the next behind loop, 1 stitch into the next behind loop, and then 2 stitches into the next behind loop. So it's 1 1 2 1 1 2 is the pattern that you're working on. So 1 stitch behind, another stitch behind in the next stitch, and then a 2 stitch increase into that back loop. All right, so keep working in that pattern and I will meet you back around over here. All right, so we've worked our way around and we should be on our last stitch before our join. And so that last stitch should have 2 half double crochet in it. So go ahead and do that a minute. Into that behind loop. And then you're going to slip stitch to join in the 1, 2, the top chain stitch. And now we're just chaining 2 because we're doing half double crochets. Snug that down a little bit, and you have just finished your next row. Now the formula for this is that you keep going around 1, 2, increasing until you get to the width that you want the top of your hat to be. And so the width that I make this, you'll get to the point where your formula, because we're adding a stitch in every time, so it's going to be 3 half double crochets and then an increase, 3 half double crochets and then an increase. We're going to keep doing that formula until you complete a row that has 5 half double crochets and then an increase. So keep going, and I will show you the start of each one just so that you can see it, but I'm going to try and go quickly so this tutorial doesn't get too long. You can always back up, slow down, pause, catch up, whatever you need to. So yarn over after you do your chain 2. And look for that first behind loop, which is the kind of tricky one to find. That first one's a little tricky, but once you get past that one, the rest of the row goes a lot easier. And just do a 1 half double crochet into there, and then you're going to do another half double crochet so that you have into the next stitch, so that you should be at 3 stitches, because that counts as our first half double crochet, and then you're going to do an increase. So 2 in the same stitch, the behind loop of your next stitch. So half double crochet into the first, half double crochet into the second, half double crochet into the third, and then half double crochet increase, which is 2 half doubles into the same stitch. And keep doing that all the way around, and I will meet you back over here. So I've gone all the way around with my pattern of 1, 2, 3 increase, and I need to do one last increase into the behind loop here, so I'm going to do that a minute, and then I will slip stitch to join. So slip stitch into that top chain, the second chain, and join up there, and then you're going to chain 2 again, 1, 2, and then work into that behind loop on your first stitch there, that tricky one to find. You kind of gotta wiggle around for it. Oh, there, I got it. There you go. And then do 2 more half double crochets into the next 2 behind loops. So you have your chain 2, 1, 2, 3, and then do an increase into the behind loop on the next stitch. And then keep doing that pattern all the way around. So in the behind loop it goes 1, and then into the next stitch is 2, and into the next stitch is 3, and into the next stitch is 4, and then do your increase. So 2 half double crochets into the same behind loop on your next stitch. Keep working that pattern all the way around, and I'll meet you back. Okay, so I have done my 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches and an increase all the way around. I just have to do my last increase into the behind loop, so I will do that. And then we will join our round again into the 1, 2, second chain. Right there we slip stitch to join. And that is our round completed. Now, if I was doing a child size hat, I would stop doing my increase rows right here, because I only have one more increase row to do before I start or stop increasing, and then my hat will just start to curve and turn its way down. But since I'm not making a child size hat, I am going to do one more row of increase. But if you are making this hat child size, jump ahead and then meet me when I am done doing my increase rows, and then I will show you how to go from there. So we're going to start here by doing our last increase row by chaining 2. Yarn split on me. There we go. and then into that first back loop. That's tricky to find. I'm using Caron Simply Soft yarn, and if I was thinking, I probably would have used a different yarn for this tutorial, because I feel like that kind of looks a little untwisted as you go, so it can be a little bit difficult to see those distinct bumps and loops. But so I have my first 2 here, and then I'm going to do 3 more, so I get a total of 5 half double crochets before I do an increase. So I have my chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then do an increase. So 2 half doubles into the next behind loop, and then do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then do another increase, so 2 into the same behind loop, and repeat that until you get all the way back around. All right, so that should be, you should be right at the end where you only have 1 increase left after doing your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. And so do your last increase into that back loop of your last stitch, and then go 1, 2, and slip stitch into that first chain, or that top chain to join, and then you're going to chain 2 again, and then we're going to do these half double crochets into our behind loops for several more rows to start getting the hat to make that downward curve. But we are going to be doing that in every single stitch. So don't worry about increasing or counting any more stitches. You're just doing a single half double crochet into the behind loop of every single stitch for the next several rows. And hopefully by now I've showed you enough times how to do the join with the rows, the chain 2, and then looking for that first kind of tricky to see behind loop on that very first stitch, that you should be able to do these next few rows without any further instructions, since we're just doing a half double crochet into every single behind loop all the way around. And let me count, how many rows do we do that for? There's my last increase row. So we do it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. So do 6 rows where every single stitch you work a half double crochet into that behind loop, and then I will meet you back here once you have that completed, and I will show you how to work the puff stitches around for the next section of the hat. Okay, so at this point, your beanie should be starting to curl in on itself to make a dome shape. Should be looking like this. You should have 2 rows of double crochet in the middle, and then these rows coming out here. So if you count, including these double crochet rows and all of your rows that you've done out, you should have 13 rows total. So we're going to start doing our row of puff stitches. You can see here on this one, we do our puff stitch row first. And so what you're going to do your puff stitch row is, I just did a slip stitch to join on our last round. So we're going to go ahead and chain 3 this time. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to yarn over and start to do a puff stitch in our first stitch here. And we're going to do it into the back of the stitch, just like we've done that behind loop right there, just like we've done for all of these rows, to get that knit effect in our half double crochets. And to do a puff stitch, I'll go through it slow. So you yarn over, find that behind loop, put your hook through, grab your yarn, pull it through and pull up a loop so you have a little bit of space there. It's a little loose. Yarn over again for a second time, go through that same loop, hook your yarn, pull up another loop to match, do it a third time into that same loop, pull up a loop, and then you're going to do it one last time, so you do it a total of 4 times. Into that same loop, pull up your loop, yarn over, pull through all of the loops on your hook, and then you chain 1 to close the stitch, just like that. Now we're not going to work our next puff stitch into the very next stitch here. We're going to skip a stitch and we're going to work it into the behind loop on the second stitch. So you're going to skip a stitch and work into the behind loop on the next stitch over. And you're just going to go straight and do your next puff stitch. So yarn over, pull up a loop, 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 yarn over, pull through all of the loops on your hook, and do 1 chain stitch to close the stitch. So when we're doing our puff stitch, skip another stitch and go into the next one. That's going to be your sequence. You're just going to skip a stitch and go into the next one all the way around. But when you do your puff stitch, working into that behind loop, once you do this 4 times, 3, 4, you should have a total of 9 strands on your hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sorry, it's a little hard to see with this yarn. It tends to flatten out and untwist. But whatever yarn you're using, you should have a total of 9 loops on your hook when you go to close your puff stitch. So skip your stitch, go into the next one, into that behind loop, make your next puff stitch, and close it up. And keep working those puff stitches just like that all the way around the beanie. Skip a stitch, puff, skip a stitch, puff, skip a stitch, puff, all the way around. And then I will meet you back over here. Okay, so we're completing our row here, and we have 2 stitches left, and you're going to do 1 more puff stitch in this last stitch here. So you're going to keep going with your pattern of skipping a stitch and doing a puff stitch. So do your last puff stitch into your last stitch of the round. Chain 1 to close it, and then you're going to look for your 3rd chain in your row here. So 1, 2, 3, and you are going to slip stitch to join right there, just like you did on your other rounds. Now you're going to chain 2 because we're going to go back in with our half double crochet stitches. So chain 2. And now this first stitch here, this puff stitch, because it was you went into your very first stitch here to keep your stitch counts correct, what you need to do is you need to work into the top of this puff stitch right here. Now that's going to feel a little weird because you're going to feel like you're skipping a stitch, but I promise this is going to get you an accurate stitch count when you go around. So yarn over and do a half double crochet into the top of that puff stitch. This is going to look like it's pulling over a little bit, but trust me, it does work out. And then you're going to do a half double crochet into the space between your puff stitches, and then half double crochet into the top of your next puff stitch, and then half double crochet into the gap, and half double crochet into the top of the next stitch, and half double crochet into the gap, and you're going to keep doing that until you get all the way around, and then I'll meet you back over here. Okay, so we're back here, we're about to join again. So do your last half double crochet into the top of your last puff stitch, and then you're going to slip stitch to join in the 1, 2, second chain there. Snug it up tight so you don't have any gaps. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to do half double crochet all the way around, just like you did on all of these here. So I'll show you over here. The way that this works is that you wind up doing a total of 2 rows of half double crochet all the way around, because this is your row of half double crochet that you just did into your puffs and your gaps. And then you're going to do 1 more row of half double crochet all the way around into the behind loop to get that second, that ridge popping out, and then we're gonna work on our bead stitches after that. So you just did your first row of half double crochet, you need to do 1 more, and then I will show you how to do the bead stitch here. So chain 2, 1, 2, and then do your half double crochet into that fiddly defined first behind loop on your first stitch, and then just work into that behind loop all the way around with your half double crochets. And then I will meet you around the other side, and I will show you how to do the bead stitch row. Here we are at the end of our row again. I'm going to do my last half double crochet into my last stitch and slip stitch to join in the second chain. And now to do the bead stitch, what we're going to do is you're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to do a double crochet stitch, not a half double, but a full double crochet stitch in that behind loop on your first stitch here. And now with the bead stitch, it's similar to the puff stitch, but instead of working into a loop down here, we're going to work it behind the double crochet post that we just created. So yarn over, stick your hook in between your chains and your double crochet stitch, loop around, hook your yarn, pull it through, and pull up a loop. Now you're going to do that 3 more times. So with the puff stitch, we pulled up loops 4 times. And with the bead stitch, we're also going to pull up loops 4 times. So they're extremely similar stitches, just instead of working it into down here in one of these stitches, you're working it behind and around your double crochet stitch. So yarn over, go between your stitches, loop back around, grab your yarn, pull up a loop, do that for a 3rd time, hook between your stitches, grab your yarn, pull up a loop, and 1 last time, hook between your stitches, back around, pull up a loop. So you should have a total of 9 loops on your hook. So 3, 6, 9, just like we did with the puff stitch. Now yarn over and pull through all of the loops, but we're not going to chain 1 to close the stitch. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to yarn over, and then we're going to skip 1 stitch, and we're going to work into the behind loop on that 2nd stitch right there. And we're going to do a double crochet stitch. Just like that. So the bead stitch sits horizontal with how the yarn falls. The puff stitch sits vertical with how the yarn falls. And with the bead stitch, you're going to have these double crochet stitches in between our beads. So now that we have one full stitch, what we're going to do is we're going to start our next one. So we're going to do a double crochet into the very next stitch. We're not skipping any stitches when we start our next one. We're going into the very next stitch here. So do your double crochet into that behind loop. And now when I go through behind this post here, I'm going to put my hook in between these two double crochet stitches right here. So yarn over, go between the stitches, behind, pull up a loop, yarn over, between the stitches, behind, pull up a loop, yarn over, between the stitches, behind, pull up a loop, and last time yarn over, between the stitches, behind, and pull up a loop. Yarn over, go through all of the loops on your hook, and then you're going to do your double crochet, skipping the next stitch right here, and going into that second stitch right there, we're going to do our next double crochet into the behind loop. We're still always working into that behind loop so that we can make sure that these rows here are still giving that knit effect. And don't worry if you see, like when you're doing it, that these loops are kind of getting pulled up big. Once you get the whole hat worked out, they just stay nice. They don't pull up weird or funny. They just look normal. So don't be anxious about that. I was a little bit concerned about that when I first made this up, but once I got the hat worked up, it just sat nicely and it didn't look weird or funny at all. So I'll show you how to do one more bead stitch, and then you're going to keep doing that pattern all the way around. So we're not skipping a stitch here. We only skip a stitch after we do our wraps around here. So go into the very next stitch with your double crochet into the behind loop. And then we're going to put our hook in between these two stitches right here. So yarn over, between the stitches, behind, pull up, yarn over, between the stitches, behind, pull up, yarn over, between the stitches, pull up, yarn over, between the stitches, hook your yarn, pull up. Then yarn over, pull through everything on your hook, and then do your next double crochet, skip this stitch, and go into the second one. And that is how it goes. The reason why we skip that stitch after we finish our wraps here is just to give enough room in the fabric for these to lay flat and not to get bunchy. So that's why you skip a stitch there. So keep doing this all the way around, and I will meet you back up over here. So I just did all my puff stitches all the way around, and I'm right here at this point here. So I have 3 stitches left after doing my last puff stitch. So I'm going to do one more, or bead stitch, excuse me. I'm going to do one more bead stitch. So I'm going to double crochet into the next stitch. I'm not skipping any. Right into there. And then I'm going to do my last bead stitch. And then I'm going to do my last double crochet to secure the stitch down into the behind loop right on this last stitch right here. And yes, you're going to wind up with a double crochet and your chain stitch right next to each other. But if you see here, you'd really have to be looking for that. I didn't think that it was anything of concern for me to feel like it messed with the vibe of the hat or that it didn't match up well. I honestly didn't even think twice about it. Once it was done and you look at the back of the hat It just looks like it's part of the seam. It doesn't look off or askew on the hat at all. So go ahead and do a slip stitch to join in that 1, 2, 3rd chain right there. Snug it down a smidge. And then you are going to do your chain 2. And now for this to line up correctly with our stitches, you are going to go ahead and do your first half double crochet into this first stitch here. And again, it looks a little wonky because the front of the loop is there and the back of the loop is pulled up, but that is your first stitch that you need to go for. So go ahead and put both loops on your hook. You're not just working into a behind loop here because this is not a half double crochet row. You don't have that option. So you need to just work into every stitch all the way around. So that first stitch, do your first half double crochet. And then half double crochet right here into the top of your bead stitch. And then you're going to half double crochet into this gap space here. And then you're back into your repeat. So you're going to work into the top of this next stitch here. And keep doing half double crochets all the way around, next into the top of the bead stitch. And then into this gap space here. Top of your next stitch right there. You can see there's bumps there. So if you keep just going into those sets of bumps, you shouldn't get lost as to where you have to put your half double crochets all the way around. So keep working these half double crochets all the way around the tops of your bead stitches here, and then I will meet you back at the row join. So we're approaching the end of our row here. I have just a couple of stitches left, so I'm going to do my half double crochet into the top of my bead stitch. And then half double crochet into this, which is technically the top of your double crochet. Mine's just a little stretched out, which is fine. And then you go ahead and slip stitch to join in that 1, 2 second chain right there. Snug that up a little bit. And you did your bead stitch row. Now you're going to do one more row of half double crochet into the behind loop all the way around one more time. And then you are going to do another row of puff stitches. So do your half double crochet round all the way around, and I will meet you around the other side. Okay, so we just finished our second row of half double crochets round, and now we are going to do our next row of puff stitches just exactly how we did our puff stitches down here. So I'm just going to get you started on this row quickly. If you need a better refresher, you can always go back and show the more detail that I give on this row down here, but I'm just going to get you started. So chain 2, and then into your very first stitch here, you are going to do your first puff stitch into that behind loop. 2, 3, 4 loops up, all the loops on your hook, chain it to close the stitch, skip this one, go into the next one with your next puff stitch, 3, 4, all the loops on your hook, chain 1 to close it, skip this one, go into the next one, and keep doing that all the way around, and I will meet you on the other side. You guys are doing great. We're almost done with our hat. All right, I'll see you when we get to the end here. So I'm right at the end of my row of puff stitches here. I have 2 stitches left. I'm going to do one more puff stitch in this last stitch here, and then join my row. Slip stitch to join in the first, second, third. Right there. And then you're going to want to go ahead and chain 2. Now remember, this counts as our very first stitch of the row here. So we're going to start back with our half double crochets into the top of this puff stitch. So go into the top of the puff stitch and then into the gap with a half double crochet, into the top of the puff stitch and into the gap, and keep doing this all the way around. And once you get that all the way around, the only thing that you have from there is just to finish off your rows of half double crochets until your beanie is the length that you want it to be. Now if you want your beanie to be extra slouchy, you could always put in do 2 more rows of half double crochet and then throw another row of bead stitches in there and then finish off your beanie if you really want a nice extra slouchy beanie. Otherwise, if you want it to be just a little bit longer, you can always do your half double crochet rows until you feel like it fits the length of your head and you feel like you have the right fit that you're looking for. I've even done with these hats before a ribbed edge, an extra long ribbed edge along the bottom, so that you could fold it over and have a fold over brim on your beanie. That is always an option too. And I like to do, I don't like to do my ribbing separate from the project, so I would just keep stitching. There's a way of doing a ribbed stitch where you don't have to do the rib stitch separately and then crochet it on or sew it on. You can do it all in one go, which if you're interested, I can do a tutorial on that sometime. I'm not going to do that in this video because that would just take way too long. But that is always an option too. You can always do a double ridged brim and have a fold over brim, which gives the hat kind of a nice finish as well. If you have any questions or if there's anything that I can help you troubleshoot, feel free to drop that in the comments below. I want to make sure that my tutorials are always very clear, very understandable, and to make sure that you guys are able to follow right along with me and finish up your project. This project doesn't take a terrible long time. If you're just stitching away at it and if you're a decently fast crocheter, you could probably get this done, I would say, in an hour to an hour and a half. I would probably take an hour and a half, but I'm not the fastest crocheter in the world. So it just depends on how fast you're stitching and if you get distracted. I'm usually always interrupted whenever I'm working on a project because my kids have things that they need of me while I'm stitching away on stuff. So, but this is just a really nice, definitely get done in a day project. And it makes a super cute beehive style beanie that is good for the fall and winter months. If you wanted it a little bit warmer, like if this was going to be your go-to beanie for like your outdoor sports and things like that, I would suggest doing that ribbed beanie edge that you could fold over just to give you an extra layer to make sure it's nice and warm on your head. But it's definitely warm enough for, you know, getting to and from your car in the winter months and things like that. I'm here in Michigan and our winters can get pretty chilly and I've never had an issue. My head's always been nice and toasty warm with my Puffs and Beads beanie here. So I will go ahead and show you. You can see how that's looking and how the difference in stitches are. So you have that nice ridges here, your puffs, your beads, your puffs, and that is the same on this hat here. Now this hat I worked up in Mandala ombre yarn, so that is why you get these color changes. That is just how the yarn worked up. That was not me changing colors along the way. You could do it that way if you wanted to. I prefer self-striping yarn because I'm too lazy to sew in ends and I don't want to have to deal with changing my colors. But that is just how this one worked up as well. It's kind of interesting because that purple came right as I was doing into my puff stitches, so it worked out kind of perfect. I can't guarantee that that'll work for you, but that was how it worked out for me. So I'm going to go ahead and count these. So if you wanted to just finish this up and have it be the exact size of this one, you would need to do, so you're working on this row here into the top of your puff, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more rows of the half double crochets to get that faux knit. And now you should hopefully know several more stitches. You should know how to do puff stitch, you should know how to do bead stitch, and you should be able to know how to do this really fun faux knit half double crochet stitch. Now if you were working that half double crochet stitch not in the round, you would have to tie off your ends every time because you need to be coming at the stitch from the same direction every time. It's not something where you can turn your corner and keep working it. If you wanted to do it in a flat panel, you'd have to cut your end when you get to the end of the row and then start your row back at the start of the one that you just finished, so that you could always get into that behind loop on your stitches. But I think that for now, I will go ahead and post a picture here at the end of what this finished product beanie looks like. I'll finish stitching this up, take a couple pictures for you so you can see exactly what it looks like. I actually really like this in just a plain color because it really highlights those beautiful stitches. But it is definitely super fun in this striped color as well. And I'm going to put it in the description at the beginning of the video. I should have mentioned it before, but I just forgot. You can use any yarn for this that requires a 5.5 millimeter hook, and your gauge should be correct on stitching this up to fit your head. If you're going to use a smaller yarn or a thicker yarn or a different size hook, I cannot guarantee that your gauge will be correct for sizing. So for this pattern, any yarn that will work that recommends a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. So like I said, this is Mandala Ombre from Lion Brand, and this is Caron Simply Soft. All right, thanks so much for hanging out with me, guys. Be sure to like this video if you wound up making this hat, if you just love this pattern and are interested to see more fun patterns like this. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. That definitely gives you a chance to see everything that I have going on between in-depth yarn reviews, yarn hauls, tutorials, podcast episode, all that good stuff. And thanks so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate your support. It does mean a lot. And I'm just so glad that you were able to hang out and that we could stitch this up together today. All right, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.